Here we go. Well, I didn't. I didn't grab the wrong one, did I? Okay. Is that better? Worse? About the same? It's going to take more than that to improve your preaching, brother. um, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I'm not a great orator, and I acknowledge that I am not. And there would be people who would do better with this text than me. Okay. The second is not my fault, and we're going to get to why that second reason is. Matter of fact, this has been a really hard sermon for me to prepare. We're going to go through verse 24 today. I'm thinking about making the 25 through the end of the chapter more of a Bible class or something like that, because I told a buddy of mine that preaches this week what my text was for the week, and he said, I would never preach that in a sermon. So that was reassuring that I would never try to preach it that way. I would actually do that in a Bible class, and I thought, well, thanks for telling me now. So 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1, now for the matters you wrote about. So the start of the letter that we've gone through in the first 6 chapters of 1 Corinthians is about what Paul has heard about the church, right? This is where it gets complicated, because chapter 7 is about answering questions that he has written to them. Okay, try to follow that. These were questions written to Paul. Now, have you ever eavesdropped? Nah, none of y'all have ever eavesdropped on a conversation, have you? Eavesdropped on a conversation where somebody's on the phone and you can only hear what the person is saying, but you can't hear what they're hearing in their ear? Everybody's done that, hasn't it? You can't live in society in 2024 and not do that. That's kind of what we're doing today. And sometimes this text is not taken in that light. We have Paul's answers, but we do not have the questions that the Corinthians wrote him about. It's going to require some humility and some understanding on our part to get that. We don't have the benefit of the questions that the church asked of Paul that are answered in chapter 7. And that is a big deal as far as the context of the chapter. Craig Bloomberg, an author, one of the 3 authors of the Introduction to Bible Interpretation, says, few passages have been more abused and ripped from their historical moorings than 1 Corinthians 7. Because all we have is answers. We don't have any questions. Without understanding the context of what the Corinthians are wanting to do, and we're going to try to go down that road this morning as best I can. There is a celibate segment of the Corinthian church, and that is a lot to what Paul is responding to. And it's easy to attribute Paul having an overly negative view of marriage because that's who he's writing to. That's not what's going on here, but it's easy to do that. What seems to lie behind the Corinthians' questions is an activism, for lack of a better word, for celibacy. We've lived our lives filthily up till now, so now we must all be celibate. Okay? That's kind of where they're coming from. They go from one extreme, promiscuous, to another, celibacy. So keep that in mind as we read 1 Corinthians 7, and just remember, this chapter does not, nor does it intend to, answer all of our questions about celibacy, singleness, or marriage. It just doesn't answer them all. Mostly because we don't know the questions. So what would you say influences our views or expectations, maybe is a better word, about marriage and a family relationship? I think our upbringing has a lot to do with it, and I think studies show that. If if a young person is raised in a two-parent home where two people are harmoniously married, they have a better chance of having that kind of relationship when they get older. The media definitely has something to do with it. The media is not very pro-marriage right now. And then, of course, Scripture. People who delved into Scripture, that's going to have an influence on how they see marriage and look at marriage. But our culture has taken marriage and basically flushed it down the commode. And that's basically what the Corinthians had done too. Divorce was rampant in the first century, especially in Corinth. Corinth was a morally promiscuous culture that led to an avalanche of immorality and severed marriages. And you would say, not a lot's changed, has it? Not a lot's changed. Remarriage was universally granted to both Jewish and Roman Greek society. So with all that background in mind, let's dig into the passage. Like I said, it's disjointed. For instance, we'll be going 1 through 5 and then 10 and 11 because they kind of go together. And then we'll go back and get 6 through 9. So here we go. Now for the matters I wrote you about, it is good for, it's matters that you wrote about. Again, we have the answers, not the questions. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with any woman, but since the sexually immoral is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty with his wife, and likewise the wife with the husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. And in the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent for a time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. You skip down to verse 10. To the married I give this command, not I but the Lord. Now that's important because he's going to say just the opposite in just a little bit. Not I but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband. If she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband must not divorce his wife. So this scenario is dealing with a believer married to a believer. You boil down everything Paul says in his advice for Christian marriages, not knowing the exact terms of the question that was asked. And according to verse 2, one purpose for marriage is fulfillment, intimacy. That avoids fornication, intimate relations between two people who aren't married to each other. And then Paul links verse 4 to what he wrote that we talked about last week in chapter 6, 19 and 20. That our bodies are not independent islands unto themselves, but we are living sacrifices. The temple is right here. The temple is here. The temple is here. The temple is here. The temple is your mind, your heart, your gut, where you make your decisions, where your emotions lie. We belong to God, and if you're married, you belong to your mate. Sexual intimacy must not be used as a weapon to get what one wants. We aren't governed by the physical church, but we're governed by the spiritual. Verse 5. In 10 and 11, Paul is repeating what Jesus said in Matthew 19, 5 and 6. The emphasis is not on as much on remarriage eligibility, but valuing confession and forgiveness and reconciliation. Reconciliation is always, always, always the first and best option. So thinking about that, what are the most healthy ingredients for a healthy, God-honoring marriage? What does it take to make a marriage last a long time? The long haul, so to say. I got to get this right. Debbie and I will be married 35 years. December the 30th this year. It's an interesting story how we got married on December the 30th, why we picked that day. if you want to hear the story sometime. Some of you know the story. But so I feel like I've got some, not that I'm a perfect husband, but I feel like that I can give you some advice here. I'm the son of a couple that's been married 50-some years, maybe 60-some years. So take this for what you will. I think faithfulness is maybe the number one key to a God-honoring marriage. Loyalty to your spouse on a foundation of trust that's built in your marriage. Honesty. A spouse should be able to trust you as their partner and should be able to be honest to you with what they're feeling about successes and failures, whether that's success and failure individually or success and failure as a couple. Humility. This is one that's tougher for, it seems like, couples today that I counsel. Being humble, being unassuming, putting the other person first. Patience. Showing kindness when you're feeling irritated with one another. Now, I'd like to tell you that Debbie's never felt irritated with me today. Understanding. Practicing empathy and seeing situations from your spouse's angle. You know, that's a hard thing to do sometimes, to see, whether it's your spouse or whether it's your friend or whether it's your brother, your sister, or your enemy, seeing things from their angle. But boy, when you take time to do that, it can be very enlightening to what's going on. Understanding, practicing empathy and seeing situations, is really important and I think very underrated in a marriage. Forgiveness. A strong, godly marriage forgives not once a year, not once a month, not once a week, but every day. I'm sure I do something that Debbie Stowers has to forgive me for every day. Every day. And then communication. Communication is essential to marriage. I would love to tell you that I am the poster boy for that list. I am not the poster boy for that list. I struggle with a lot of these things. I'm trying to get better at them, but I struggle with a bunch of them. I'm better at some than others, and I'm not very good at others. But I think it's something that a godly, healthy marriage, they'll strive for these things. The second scenario is found in 1 Corinthians 7:12 through 16. This is lengthy, so stay with me. To the rest I say this, and note this, in parentheses it says, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if any woman has a husband who is not a believer and he is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. Otherwise your children will be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother and sister is not bound in circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? The second scenario that Paul deals with in this text is a married believer married to an unbeliever. And what is different about Paul's counsel here? He says, I, not the Lord. Now, what does that mean? Paul's advice here is in an area where maybe he didn't think Jesus specifically addressed. That's the best answer I can give you. Paul calls unbelievers to remain married to unbelievers unless the unbeliever abandons the marriage in verse 15. And even in a spiritually mixed marriage or a spiritually divided family, the presence of the believer is called by Paul a blessing to all the family. Perhaps the question, and I'm guessing at a question that they wrote Paul, but perhaps the question that was written to Paul was something like, since we've converted to Christ, do we have to stay married to my spouse who hasn't converted to Christ? And Paul's answer is yes. His answer is yes, unless the unbeliever leaves. You know, whether it's in marriage, or whether it's in bringing up your children, or whether it's at work, or whether it's in a circle of your friends, you cannot undervalue, you cannot underestimate the value of your godly influence. Your godly influence in your family, your godly influence in your peer group, your godly influence where you work, your godly influence with your classmates. You can't underestimate that. You can't write that off. You can't say it doesn't matter. The Bible says over and over and over and over again, it does matter. It does matter. You can't underestimate the value of godly influence. This is what Eric read the first couple of verses. I'm going to read all 6 verses of 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe in the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes. Now, this is one of the texts that the commentator we talked about before. This text has been abused and turned upside down, and a square crammed in a circle hole. This is not saying you can't wear your hair nice and you can't wear jewelry and you can't look nice. That's not what this is saying. This is saying don't let that be your beauty. Don't let that be your beauty. That may be the first thing people notice about you. Don't let it be the last thing. Don't let it be the thing they walk away with. As we said before, what they need to walk away with is here, here, and here. What's in my soul? Who I am down deep inside. That was a side note, but it's a scripture that some, not everybody, and probably not even the majority, but a lot of people have taken that verse and just ran with it. And it's taken, if you take it that way, you take it extremely out of context. Rather, it should be your inner self, the unfading beauty, and of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way holy women of the past put their hope in God and used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their husband, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him to her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what's right and do not give way to fear. Paul says in verse 16, for all you know, you may save your spouse. And I don't think I have to explain to anybody here how important your spouse is to getting you to heaven. Young people, listen up. Do not date anyone who is not getting you closer to God. If they're not getting you closer to God, you find somebody that is. Find somebody who's walking toward Jesus and catch up with him. I shudder to think where I would be today if I hadn't married Debbie Stowers. And I didn't mean this as a soliloquy to her. If I had, I would have warned her. But where would I be spiritually without her? I wouldn't be here right now, I'll tell you that. Might not be in church. Might not be here, period. I don't know. You need to be part of the reason that your spouse wants to get to heaven. You need to be part of the reason why they get to heaven. Scenarios 3, 4, and 5 are found in 1 Corinthians 7. Again, kind of disjointed. Verses 8, 9, and 25. Now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they can't control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Skip down to verse 25. Now about the virgins, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. The unmarried, the widows, and the virgins. How do you distinguish between those three? And I'm going to be honest with you, it kind of depends on what you think about it, what your interpretation of it is, and maybe whose opinion you value. The unmarried, I believe, is the previously married but now divorced, for whatever reason, not married. The widows are, of course, that's pretty self-explanatory. They're a widow because their spouse died. And, of course, the virgins are the people who were never married. They hadn't been married yet. Paul, I don't think, identifies them with the unmarried. I think unmarried and virgins are two different things. What's Paul's counsel to the previously married and to the widows? It is good to remain unmarried. Now, I got to tell you something. And there's no right answer to this question, by the way. Men, you ladies just turn me off for a second. If your wife ever asks you, honey, if I pass, what would you do? The correct answer is, I'd be so distraught I just don't know. That's the right answer. Whether that's what you think or not, that's the right answer. Paul calls this, it's good to remain unmarried, a gift from the Lord in verses 6 and 7. He says this, I say as a concession, not as a command. Again, not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I. But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. For the unmarried, in verse 9, Paul says it's better to marry than to burn with passion, with intimacy, the longing for intimacy or fulfillment outside of God's divine design. What's God's divine design? God's divine design is one husband, one wife. Faithfulness, loyalty, honesty, trust, humility, humbleness, patience, kindness, understanding, empathy, forgiveness, communication. That's God's divine design. Seems to me, the more I study the church in Corinth, the more I think, man, we seem to have a lot of those things going on today. So Paul's advice is good for us. A couple things I want you to remember. One, chapter 7, when you go to chapter 7 and you study it, or you use it to study with somebody, or you use it to show somebody something in the Bible, remember, we are looking at the answers and not the questions. Okay? Keep it in context. Keep it in context. How many of you are hearing that for the very first time this morning? Okay, well, most of you already knew. We've got the answers without the questions. Is there some danger in misinterpreting things if you have the answers without the questions? Oh, yeah. There's a huge danger in misinterpreting things. But two, and we're going to end up in the same place where we ended up with last week. I don't know what you think of this church building. I wish you guys were closer to me, is what I wish. I wish that we would have a Sunday where everybody was required to move up 10 pews. Maybe we'll put a $100 bill in under one of these front 4 or 5 pews, and maybe that would work. I don't know. But there's nothing about this that's holy. Everything about this is holy, including the one you're united with, including the one you pledged your loyalty to, your faithfulness, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer. Those are the things that are holy. We get in a lot of discussions, we'll call them, over things that are not as important as this. It's the most important thing. Most important thing. I love you guys. If you're here today, you need to respond in any way. We would love to assist you. Check the baptistry this week. The baptistry is good. If you're ready to put on Jesus Christ in baptism, we would love to assist you or study with you about that. Let's stand and sing.
I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are, and where you are, Lord, I agree. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my soul to rise to you when temptations come my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll call on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Thank you, Brother Tony. Closing song this morning will be "Oh, the Things We May Do." We'll sing the first and last verse and then have our closing prayer. Have you lived in